It was February 26, 2012, one evening that would change the lives of the family of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Media reports tell us that Trayvon Martin was walking through a neighborhood in Sanford, Florida, wearing a hoodie, where he was followed by neighborhood watch captain George Zimmerman. It has been said that a scuffle broke out between the two, and Zimmerman shot and killed Martin. This case has received national attention and even a response from the President of the United States. We're here in Oakland today, and we're talking to civil rights attorney John Burris, who is most known for the work he did on the Oscar Grant case. Mr. Burris shares his voice with us about how we as a nation can keep our children safe and what would be considered justice for Trayvon Martin.
John Burris, civil rights attorney, specializing in police misconduct cases.
And Mr. Burris, thank you for speaking with us today on Your Voice. We really appreciate that. And as a very prominent attorney here in the Bay Area, and with your years of experience in civil rights cases, can you give us your voice as to what you think about the Trayvon Martin case?
Well, first off, I was shocked by it, but not surprised. I've been involved in many police misconduct cases where young people have been shot and killed under circumstances that were inexplicable. This case is one where a young boy appeared to be racially profiled. He was walking in a neighborhood. He hadn't been there before. This so-called watch commander, if you will, saw him, thought there was something unusual about him, and decided to call the police and let them know that there was this unusual person in the neighborhood who appeared to be up to no good. He made a reference to a racial slur. I was told that he should not follow this person, and he decided to do so. And he really created a conflict under circumstances that should not have occurred. Appears that there was some kind of fight that took place, and ultimately Trayvon was shot and killed. In my view, this on his face was a voluntary manslaughter, he should have been arrested on the spot. If you listen to some of the evidence, Trayvon was talking to his girlfriend. He was minding his own business. He noted that someone was following him. He put his hoodie on then, and then next thing you know, there's noise going on and he's shot and killed. There's some evidence that he was screaming for help. And so when you look at all these facts, the part that's most disturbing is the police immediately took the position of George Zimmerman. And I recognize that in the state of Florida they have this stand your grounds law. But that law does not apply to a situation where you are the aggressor. If anybody should have been able to apply that law, it should have been Trayvon, because he was the one that was accosted, and he should have been able to stand his ground. And so what's wrong about this is that the person who was the aggressor, who had the gun, he shoots and kills the young man, and he walks home and goes home free. And so this case has struck a real nerve in most communities, because it's an example where a person gets shot and killed, and the person who does it is not arrested, and the question is why not? And people view that in basically some kind of racial terms, that if the situation had been different, that the black person would have been arrested and he would have had to prove his innocence later, as opposed to not being arrested, and the DA then has to go out and get more evidence to support an arrest. So in this way, the feeling really is that he should have been arrested at the outset, as opposed to not being arrested. It appears to be that there are some political issues involved here. Mr. Zimmerman's dad is a judge, retired judge. The DA of that area and the police chief came out to the scene. That is unheard of. I've never seen where a police chief in the community and the state's attorney each come out to the scene to decide whether or not they should in fact arrest a person who's just committed a homicide, particularly in light of the fact that the investigator who was on the scene, who had gotten this information at the outset, thought that Mr. Zimmerman should have been arrested. And so he was overruled. So this raised the question of whether political decisions were made in this case. And I think all of that, when you put it together, is the reason why everyone is so upset about it. You can't be the aggressor, start a fight with someone, and then shoot your way out of it, and then claim self-defense when the person who you started a fight with is unarmed. And so those are the kind of issues that are most disturbing to me.
From a perspective of law enforcement, there was a press conference where the chief of police in Florida decided to temporarily remove himself from his position. What does that tell us? His specific words were that his involvement in the investigation has become a distraction.
Theoretically, the police chief should be the one that is going to conduct the investigation. It's expected it is conducted in an objective way. But if he already has made a decision not to prosecute this person and to overrule his investigators, in his own mind's eye, no one will believe him that he is objective and that essentially believe that he is biased. And so he's basically saying, I recognize that there's a perception of me being biased, and so therefore I'm going to remove myself from here and let others conduct this investigation, and they can't then use me as a basis not to go if it doesn't go forward, to say it's my fault. So in that sense, I think it was a smart thing on his part.
Okay, the shooting, according to reports in the stories in the news, the shooting actually occurred on February 26th, it was. But we didn't, as a nation, hear about it until approximately maybe a month later. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's certainly surprising that the young man stayed in the morgue for 3 days and no one knew anything about him. Now, it is true he wasn't from the area, and so there was some concern, and the family didn't call the police right away. What I don't understand is why, even after it occurred, that it took another month for it to become a public story. Now, that may be that the family didn't know what to do. You know, most shootings that take place, the family doesn't know all the facts. They may not have known what the circumstances were that caused this, or that this man had been not charged with anything, or they may have been told a story that they didn't know how to investigate or to examine. So, in my way of thinking, is that the family did not have enough information to really know what was going on, and they may have been given disinformation, the wrong information that made them think that it was properly investigated and everything was fine. It really wasn't until somebody started asking some questions, more questions, that the family itself then started to raise questions themselves. Most everyday people are not that sophisticated about these kinds of issues. If it had been the police, it would have been probably different. But this wasn't the police. This was an independent person. So it is surprising that it took as long as it did, but it's probably more because of a lack of information on the part of the family.
As I listened to the 911 tapes, there was the neighbor who lived within the area, and as she was speaking to the police, she said, someone's crying out for help. He's saying, help, help. There was a close friend of Zimmerman who appeared on the Good Morning America show and said that that was actually Zimmerman's voice.
Obviously, the person who spoke on behalf of Mr. Zimmerman didn't have any scientific basis to make that decision. He didn't really know Mr. Zimmerman that well. He never heard him really scream or cry out for help. So I think that was wishful thinking on his part. The only thing we do know is that there's been voice testing done by 2 experts, each applying a different method, have come to the same conclusion, that the voice that was crying out for help was not that of Mr. Zimmerman. And what they did was compare Zimmerman's voice pattern with that of the pattern of the voice of the yelling, crying out for help. And what they determined is that voice was not that of Mr. Zimmerman, but it was a voice of a younger person. Now, that makes a lot of sense, and it confirms what the other lady has said, but it really casts doubt upon the friend of Mr. Zimmerman and on the story that Mr. Zimmerman has essentially given, because he says he cried out for help. And there's only really one voice that is discernible as having cried out for help. So again, I think it raises real questions about the credibility of Mr. Zimmerman. And I think ultimately this kind of information will lead to his arrest and ultimately his indictment. You could say that the police didn't have enough information at the time to arrest him. You could say that. I don't necessarily agree with that. But as evidence has continued to unfold, the testimony of the girlfriend on the telephone, the voice tape, the crying out for help, Mr. Zimmerman following, and he having the gun, and maybe not even medical testimony, evidence to corroborate his claims of a vicious fight or fighting for his life, and or you have the videotape of him getting out of the car at the police station where he doesn't look like he was in distress or he had been in very much of a struggle, and another person saying it was a bigger person that was on top of the younger person at the time. So all of those factors seems to me would support an arrest, which I do think will happen.